The trio had been inseparable since the beginning of high school. Very different from each other, they seemed like an odd group to everyone, but nevertheless, they had been very good friends from the very first day they met. All three were beauties and had a good sense of style, which quickly made them quite popular among their classmates. They differed in character but complemented each other well, which was exactly why they became friends. Gabby was the main instigator among them, possessing natural beauty, charm, and a sense of style. With wavy, shiny black hair, large, sparkling dark brown eyes, and a slender body, Gabby was proud of how she always looked. With her beautiful and open smile, she could charm anyone and often used this tactic when she needed to get something from classmates, boys, or teachers. "You only live once," Gabby always told her friends. "And you should live beautifully." This phrase was her personal creed, by which she lived and tried to teach others to live. Even in school, she was the center of attention. Girls tried to be like her, boys tried to invite her on dates, giving her flowers and sweets, although Gabby rarely ate the latter, too concerned with maintaining her figure. A carefree, fun-loving girl, she enjoyed this popularity without much thought about the consequences of her frivolity. She changed boyfriends like gloves, sometimes allowing some handsome guy to call himself her boyfriend, then moving on to a typical bookworm who selflessly helped her pass some tests, assignments, or exams. Each time, she kept the guys as much as she could and enjoyed herself. So it wasn't surprising when she got pregnant and gave birth even before finishing school. What was positive about this event for Gabby's life was the baby, whom she loved with all her heart, as well as the fact that she became more responsible after becoming a mother. Unfortunately, the father of the child, though he acknowledged his daughter, refused to directly participate in her life, offering only to pay child support. Since then, the girl taking care of her daughter could only dream of finding a man who could love not only her, but also her daughter. This became her most cherished dream, as she really wanted to have a complete family. The second girl in the group was Anita. She was just as beautiful and led almost as active a lifestyle as Gabby from school days. The girl envied Gabby's thick and wavy hair, although she herself was the envy of many tall, long-legged, with long straight hair the color of raven wings. She was most proud of her large eyes, which seemed so because they were almost black. However, boyfriends didn't stick around in her life, despite her cheerful nature and beauty, but fortunately, Anita managed to avoid early pregnancy. After Gabby's daughter was born, she helped her friend take care of the child and often dreamed of someday being as happy. Anita saw no other happiness for herself than to find a suitable, good man with whom she could tie her life in marriage and eventually have several children with, as the girl dreamed of a large family since school. However, Anita wasn't lucky with gentlemen either, even after finishing school and university. No matter how hard she tried, she still couldn't find herself a husband. Yes, she had a few long-term relationships, but each of them ended either because of her boyfriend's infidelity, or because of the terrible character of her suitors, or because of their alcoholism and cruelty towards her. A couple of her men even got violent, prompting Anita to leave them. One such man, who bothered her for several months after their breakup, had to be reported to the police. He simply refused to let Anita go, despite treating her very poorly during their time together. The police became involved not only because the man constantly showed up at Anita's home or her workplace, but also because he tried to break into her apartment several times to catch her off guard and convince her to take him back. The man's escalating madness eventually forced Anita to turn to law enforcement. She simply no longer felt safe, and for a long time, she even stayed overnight at friends' places. However, feeling the danger emanating from her ex, Anita worried about Gabby and her little girl. After all, they were not to blame for the fact that the girl got involved with such a terrible man who refused to let her go. However, as soon as the police got involved in this situation, the man was sent to prison for several years. It turned out it wasn't his first brush with the law, and his former girlfriends also suffered greatly from his persistence and aggressive nature. And although Anita managed to get married and divorced due to her ex-husband's constant infidelity after that, she didn't lose hope and continued to search for her happiness. She wholeheartedly believed that all her trials and tribulations would someday turn into a real fairy tale, where she would finally have a loving and faithful husband, who would be kind and supportive, and a bunch of lively children she could be proud of. As for the third friend, Dolores, she cared not only about her appearance but also about her career. From school days, she was a beauty, though not as dazzling as Gabby or Anita. She often wore her hair in a ponytail, which caused it to fade so that when she let it down, her light chestnut locks beautifully shimmered with dark golden strands. Her dress sense was more modest and less flamboyant than her friends, but always tasteful. Jackets that accentuated her slender figure, well-fitted trousers, and minimal accessories uniquely set her apart among her friends. From a young age, she excelled academically and often helped her friends in subjects where Gabby and Anita weren't as strong as Dolores. This was the subject of good-natured teasing from her friends, but Dolores didn't take it to heart and understood perfectly well that this was Gabby and Anita's way of trying to convince her that relaxation and fun were just as important as studying. "Don't be so serious," Gabby would always say to Dolores whenever she got engrossed in yet another book or new training course. "You'll get wrinkles." Dolores never thought much about wrinkles. Her face, though not as refined as Gabby and Anita boasted, had smooth skin of a pleasant olive hue. A tiny mole on her cheek added charm, especially when Dolores wore elegant glasses, which helped her read. However, after finishing school, she switched to contact lenses because she didn't quite like hiding her almost amber eyes behind spectacles. Though she dressed more modestly than her friends, she still attracted attention from school days, not so much for her beauty, but more because she was always ready to help with assignments or provide some solution. Perhaps her dedication to studies and her determination influenced her life, or maybe she planned it that way, but nearing 30, she couldn't boast an extensive list of boyfriends, a husband, or children. She lived alone in a pleasant apartment, which she furnished herself, assembling an exquisite interior with the decent salary she earned as a human resources director. Despite her busy schedule, Dolores managed to combine work with pursuing a second higher education and regular Pilates sessions, keeping her in good shape. But she lacked time, energy, and desire for anything else, and thus, there were no men in her life. Her career-oriented mindset surprised her friends, and Gabby and Anita would often privately discuss how Dolores was so unlike other women. Unlike others, Dolores wasn't bothered by the fact that she had neither a husband nor even a boyfriend. It seemed that despite her love for Gabby's daughter, Dolores wasn't in a hurry to have her own children even for her own sake and personal happiness. Gabby and Anita were openly irritated by the fact that their friend didn't strive to find a man and simply lived for her own pleasure, even allowing herself to go on vacation and carelessly lie on the ocean shore, while Gabby always watched over her child and Anita fretted over another breakup with another man. Once, after another meeting at the cafe, which had become a weekly tradition for the three friends, Gabby and Anita walked through the city, expressing their annoyance. For the umpteenth time during the meeting, Dolores brushed off inquiries about her personal life, saying she didn't have time, while in her professional life, everything was falling into place. Hearing this, while Gabby and Anita had less than cheerful news, one had split up with another suitor, and the other hadn't gone on a single date since their last meeting. The girls harbored resentment. "Can you believe it? We only live once," Gabby sighed after meeting her friends. "I know, right?" Anita, who always accompanied Gabby home, agreed with her opinion about Dolores. "She's almost 30 and still hasn't been married once. She'll end up alone, without children or a husband, if she doesn't get her act together." Gabby shook her head. "Something needs to be done. Otherwise, Dolores will just keep living her empty and meaningless life, hiding behind her career. We need to show her what real female happiness is like. You and I understand that work isn't everything. The best happiness for a woman is children and a husband." "I agree with you, Gabby, but how do we do that? I can't even imagine what we could do to make her realize how wrong she is." Gabby pondered but didn't know how to answer that question. "I don't know. We need to think. Listen, maybe we can find someone for her, huh?" Anita suddenly suggested. "And who are we going to find for her?" "Anyone will do." There are plenty of men around. As if we don't have acquaintances who would agree to meet her. Your cousin has asked about Dolores a couple of times. Oh, he's ambitionless and doesn't take care of himself at all. Dolores won't even look at him. We don't need the man to be good. Think about it, Dolores won't keep a good man anyway, she hardly has any experience. She's been with what, 2 or 3 guys since high school? Yeah, it seems like only 3, and she broke up with them strangely and quickly. Gabby frowned unhappily. Well, let her learn the hard way. Let her realize it's not easy to find a decent man in this world. Anita scratched her chin, lost in thought. We need someone who's not a complete idiot, to catch her attention, but not too good, like a man. So you want someone to teach her how to choose men? Gabby smiled. So she understands how difficult it is to find female happiness? Exactly. And there are plenty of them around. All we need to do is find a man who might suit her taste. Look over there. Anita pointed somewhere. Gabby followed her friend's gaze and noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench at the edge of the park, around whom children were playing. No, Gabby shook her head. He's old, and look, there are kids around him. Probably his grandkids. At that moment, an elderly woman approached the man, whom he greeted with a smile, standing up, and they hugged. Yeah, you're right, and married too. Anita sighed, surveying again. Maybe that one? Gabby looked at the man indicated by her friend and thought. Handsome, fit, with well-groomed wavy hair, the man was unloading some boxes from a car. Clearly, he had just moved into their neighborhood, which worked in their favor. Oh. Gabby noticed another man approaching him, embracing him, then kissing him. No, this one definitely won't do. Yeah. I can see he's not into women. Anita sighed. The day was sunny, and their walk dragged on as they continued to scout potential men for Dolores, discussing various representatives of the opposite sex and speculating whether they were a good choice or not. Coming to a consensus was difficult. Some men seemed overly attractive for their friend, drawing more attention from Anita. Others were dismissed due to their age or other shortcomings that could clearly affect Dolores' willingness to even meet such a man. Finally, the women stopped at one of the shops to buy soda, and Gabby suddenly noticed a man sitting in the shade of a tree on the opposite side of the road. While Anita was paying for the purchases, Gabby managed to observe him very carefully. Not too old, though gaunt, with a thick beard and long, tangled hair, this man didn't resemble the typical homeless person he was. Gabby frowned, imagining the man without the beard and long hair, and suddenly realized that even considering he was homeless, he could still be considered quite attractive. She knew perfectly well what wonders could be done with his hair and overgrown beard to make him someone who could attract Dolores' attention. Don't frown. Anita nudged her friend's side with her elbow. You'll get wrinkles. Listen, I have an idea. Gabby replied, breaking into a satisfied smile. And it's simply brilliant. Oh? And what did you come up with? Look across the street. Anita glanced to where her friend was pointing and saw the homeless man. It took her a moment to understand Gabby's direction. Anita tilted her head to the side thoughtfully, studying the beggar sitting on the curb, who didn't even look up at passers-by, occasionally tossing change into his outstretched hand. He's not too old. If cleaned up, he might actually not be bad. Though, even if we clean him up, he's still homeless. Exactly. You get it? Well, say it, I'm a genius. Gabby laughed. Dolores will definitely be interested in him, but what can we take from him? He's homeless, after all. You're right. Let's go. Anita immediately grabbed her friend's elbow and dragged her towards the beggar. As soon as they approached, they noticed that the man was dressed fairly neatly, although his clothes had clearly seen better days, and the odor emanating from him indicated that he hadn't bathed in a while. Apparently, he was still trying to maintain some dignity, though life had clearly battered him. For a few minutes, the girls observed him before approaching. Collecting money for a drink? Anita snorted. I don't drink alcohol, the homeless man replied indifferently, not even lifting his gaze. I'm hungry, that's all. Gabby peeked into the bag where he dumped the change and shook her head. You've collected very little, she said. Listen, we have an offer for you. The man remained silent, looking sadly at his palm where another passerby had just placed a couple of coins. We want to offer you a very easy job, Anita nodded to her friend. Interested? If it involves heavy lifting, I won't be able to do it. Health isn't what it used to be, the man shook his head. No, it's a different kind of job. But we'll pay you well. Finally, the man cast a glance at them, and something in his sad eyes made Anita wonder what had happened to leave him homeless if he wasn't just an ordinary drunkard who had squandered all his money. He didn't resemble a drug addict either. His voice was too steady, his speech too coherent for him to be abusing anything. Anita knew well, one of her exes regularly indulged in that, which ultimately led to their breakup. And what do two women want from me? The homeless man sighed. I doubt you need someone like me. On the contrary. Gabby leaned forward, pulling out a couple of large bills from her wallet and enticing the man with them. Look. All we need from you is to meet our friend. That's it. The homeless man stared at the money for a while, understanding how much they could be worth, and pondered. On one hand, he understood that things couldn't be that simple. On the other hand, he had become too desperate on the streets. To meet, he asked again. Just to meet. That's all. Gabby smiled. But first, you need to take a shower and find some clothes. We'll help with that. Anita nodded to him. I have a couple of options that might fit you. Maybe you could use a haircut too. If you allow, I can help with that. I used to work as a hairdresser once. My hand is light. I'll tidy you up in no time. We won't even ask for your answer right now. Gabby exchanged glances with her friend. We'll come back here tomorrow. You can tell us then what you decide. The man watched as the bills disappeared from sight, returning to Gabby's wallet. Meanwhile, Anita placed some coins into his hand. Here, take this. It'll be enough for coffee. But remember, we need an answer tomorrow. The homeless man nodded to them, and both women went on their way, laughing and discussing something. Meanwhile, the man sat there and pondered, was it worth getting involved in this strange and incomprehensible adventure, not knowing the sincere motives of these two strangers? He had long stopped believing in the kindness of strangers. Life on the streets had taught him many things, including that many people were not just cruel, but genuinely malicious. While he encountered a few kind souls during the day, willing to help, toss him some change, or even give him something to eat, there were also enough people ready to insult him for no reason, kick him, or chase him away from his spot. As Gabby and Anita, leaving the homeless man behind, were already discussing how to pull off their planned adventure, Anita carelessly suggested bringing the man to her place, but the more cautious and suspicious Gabby dismissed this idea, reminding that trusting a homeless person was not wise, and he could easily steal something when they weren't looking. So, she suggested that the best option would be to rent a room in a motel and get the man cleaned up there before introducing him to Dolores. Unlike their previous outings, this time Gabby went to Anita's house, where they spent a long time selecting from the clothes left behind by Anita's ex-husband something that could fit the homeless man. In the few minutes they interacted with him, Gabby could tell that he was more or less the same size as Anita's ex-husband, so most of the clothes left should fit him. Setting aside several options that could be suitable for the upcoming date, the girls laughed for a long time, imagining Dolores's face when she finds out the man is homeless. They relished the opportunity to trick their friend and openly gloated, anticipating seeing her in tears, just as she had seen them many times after another romance they had ended. Hey, isn't it too cruel to laugh at Dolores like this? Anita finally asked as they packed clothes into a bag, preparing for the next day. You know, I don't think so. After all, we're doing all this for her own good, Gabby shrugged carelessly, packing shower gel, shampoo, men's cologne, and a shaving kit with the clothes. Don't worry about it. Maybe she'll suffer a bit, but at least she'll understand that not every well-dressed man is worth her attention. Maybe she'll come to her senses and start looking for a real man eventually. But what if it backfires? Anita, suddenly catching herself with a strange thought, froze in place, worried about the consequences of their joke. What do you mean backfires? Well, what if we end up discouraging her from finding a man altogether? Don't talk nonsense, Anita. Check if there's any underwear. We can't just dress him in all this on bare skin. Anita pursed her lips and didn't respond, heading to the closet to look for underwear in the box of clothes. She had already decided, even without Gabby, that even if their plan failed, she would give all this clothing to the homeless man to somehow compensate him for the humiliation he was about to endure. When everything was packed, Gabby hugged Anita and headed home. Luckily, they lived in neighboring buildings, so it wasn't far to walk. The next morning, when they met again, Anita was a little uneasy, carrying a sports bag with clothes and haircutting tools on her shoulder. She had spent almost the entire night pondering the idea of playing such a cruel trick on Dolores. Eventually, agreeing with Gabby's arguments, she reassured herself that she would help the homeless man to somehow make up for their guilt towards him with her friend. After all, they would pay him, and they would give him some clothes, at least. The homeless man was in the same spot as the day before, sitting under a tree on the roadside with his hand outstretched. He stared ahead, indifferent to the people passing by him, some of whom grumbled about his unkempt appearance and odor. But when Gabby and Anita approached him, the girls noticed how he looked up at them. So, have you decided? Gabby got straight to the point. Or do you want to sit here and pity yourself, collecting coins? The man looked at Anita, holding the bag, and sighed. Speak, just to meet your friend and nothing else? Just to meet. Maybe take a walk, pretend you're on a date. That's all. Gabby pulled out some bills. I'll even add some money so you can afford a cafe or something. The man lowered his gaze. He had spent the whole night thinking about this strange job these two strangers were offering him. Okay, he reluctantly agreed. Then get up. Let's go get you cleaned up. Gabby ordered. I've already booked a room for you. Don't think about wearing your stinky rags. The man didn't allow himself to grimace at those words. He was used to how many people saw him. And he understood perfectly well that his clothes did indeed smell unpleasant, as washing them cost money. While the man washed away the sweat and dirt, Gabby and Anita contacted Dolores. In their group chat, they persuaded their friend to meet them after work. Tempting her with the promise of a surprise, they made every effort to ensure Dolores actually showed up for the meeting, rather than finding reasons to refuse them. In the end, their persuasions worked, and Dolores agreed to meet them, only warning that if she couldn't finish some important meeting at work, she might be a bit late. Oh, a meeting! Gabby scoffed finally. All her meetings are so important, so incredibly complex. What a joke. Just signing some papers there. Anita glanced at her friend. Gabby, don't speak like that. Every job has its difficulties. What difficulties could there be in her job? Just sit there, look at the screen, a couple of calls, a couple of papers, and that's it. Not like us, one thing after another, plus a child who takes all our energy. Anita fell silent, knowing that for the past few days Gabby had been leaving her daughter with her own mother, who, although willing to help, was already elderly and couldn't always keep up with the active little girl. Finally, the homeless man approached Anita and Gabby, and they couldn't help but exhale in surprise. After he washed the dirt from his face, he became even more attractive than the women had previously thought. All right, sit down. Anita armed herself with a comb and scissors. That tangled mess on your head is quite a nightmare. The man obediently took a seat, remaining still as Anita trimmed his hair and beard. He had already doubted his decision 3 times, but stubbornly reassured himself that at least he could wash off the dirt, and that alone was reward enough, even if these 2 strangers somehow offended him later. But for now, they seemed quite decent. Finally, Anita finished her work and was pleased that her hand still remembered how to turn a messy pile of hair into a decent haircut, as well as tidy up the man's beard. Now he looked much more presentable than before. So, I'm done, Anita said, putting away her tools. Now for the little things. I brought some clothes for you, so you'll have a choice. Hopefully, we got the sizes right. Gabby handed the man a bag. Here, she said somewhat gruffly. As he disappeared into the bathroom, Anita exchanged glances with Gabby and suddenly realized that Gabby was getting nervous because the homeless man turned out to be much nicer looking than they had thought before. But there was no turning back now, and the meeting time was approaching, so they had no choice. In the bathroom, the man first looked in the mirror and froze for a few long moments in surprise. He looked at his reflection and couldn't believe his eyes. Anita had really outdone herself. He looked almost the same as he did long ago, before his life drastically changed because of one incredible twist of fate, turning everything upside down. Yes, he was undoubtedly thinner and more gaunt, but still, he saw a reflection he hadn't seen in many long years. The clothes they gave him seemed like a gift from the heavens: clean trousers, a fresh shirt, even a tie and a pair of shoes. To his surprise, everything fit, albeit a little loose, and he thought that if it weren't for the regular hunger he experienced, he might have looked much better. Although the shoes were slightly big, he didn't complain. Finally, he glanced at his reflection again, and his hands instinctively reached for the collar of his shirt. There was a time when he used to wear ties, and his fingers automatically wanted to adjust the knot, which wasn't there anymore. He caught himself realizing that in the shock of seeing his reflection, he had completely forgotten about the tie the girls had provided him. Though it was simple, gray, with barely noticeable stripes, he tied it around his neck and smiled, recalling the distant years when he dressed like this every day. But then he suddenly remembered that all of that was in the past, and the smile faded from his face. The man looked at his calloused hands, then lifted his gaze to his aging face, worn by all the trials he had endured, and sighed heavily. "Well? Is everything okay?" A knock came from the bathroom door. The man cleared his throat, opening the door. Anita and Gabby, seeing him, froze in surprise. "Wow," Gabby scrutinized him critically. "You don't look half bad." "Listen." Anita hesitated, studying the man's face. "We didn't even ask your name." "Julio." The man adjusted his shirt sleeves. "Well, Julio, I'm Anita, and this is my friend Gabby." Anita introduced them. "Enough with the pleasantries. It's time for us to go." Gabby waved her hand, glancing towards the bag lying in the bathroom. "And anyway, no matter how this ends, the room's paid for until tomorrow, so you can come back and get a good night's sleep on the bed, not wherever you usually crash. I'll leave you some clothes too, so." Anita smiled at the man. He didn't know how to respond to that, suspecting that he had somehow fallen into a trap that would backfire on him. As soon as they left the motel, the man began to attract attention. But whereas before passers-by looked at him with pity, disgust, or disdain, now, in his new clothes, clean and neat, he saw that there was not a hint of past hostility in people's eyes. They looked at him again as a human being. Realizing how much people's opinions always depended on others' appearances, the man felt melancholic but tried not to show it, walking alongside Anita and Gabby with squared shoulders and a proudly lifted head. Whatever these two wanted from him, he had to play his part properly, or there would be no reward. Arriving at the cafe, Anita and Gabby ordered coffee for them, and Julio was glad for the hot drink, which he used to enjoy drinking in the mornings before work. The wait was short, and soon Gabby noticed Dolores approaching the cafe. She walked confidently and steadily, talking to someone on the phone. Julio saw the girl as she approached their table and stood up, but as soon as he reached out his hand to introduce himself, he suddenly recognized her. Dolores, without even hitting decline on her phone, froze upon seeing the man before her. She couldn't understand how this could be. Standing in front of her was the only man who once instilled in her not only a love for learning but also a thirst for never giving up. She suddenly remembered how, in their second year, he helped her understand that in life, one should only rely on oneself and never give up, no matter how difficult it may seem. His psychology course not only helped her succeed in her professional life, but also maintained the balance within her that was necessary for any self-sufficient woman. "Professor?" Dolores breathed out. Anita and Gabby, upon hearing this, were stunned. Could it be that Dolores knew this person? They exchanged glances, but the shock prevented them from saying anything. Dolores. Julio grinned. Professor Fernandez, what a surprise. Dolores finally put away her phone. Julio glanced at Gabby and Anita, unsure whether he should respond. Surprise. Gabby suddenly piped up. Dolores seemed pleasantly surprised and incredibly happy to see her former teacher again, who had helped her through the difficulties of student life countless times during her education. She remembered vividly how he had not allowed her to drop out when she was going through a crisis, and it seemed to her as if she had no strength left to continue. Now she looked at him, unable to thank him enough for believing in her and instilling confidence in her heart. Anita and Gabby felt like intruders as they sat down at the table, because Dolores and Julio immediately began talking about the years gone by, inquiring about each other's successes. Dolores was surprised to hear from the professor that life had dealt him a heavy blow since they last saw each other. Gabby and Anita learned that Julio had previously taught psychology and was a very successful and respected professor, despite being only 7 years older than Dolores. The man did not hide the fact that he had become homeless, explaining to her why he had aged so much, even though he used to look young, despite his status as a teacher. When he told her that Dolores's 2 friends had offered him money to meet her, they tensed up, but their friend didn't even frown, as if she didn't care that he had been lured under such pretenses. She would have time later to ask her friends why they decided to do that, but right now she was more concerned with Julio's story of how he ended up on the streets. The professor told his former student everything without holding back. A couple of years after Dolores graduated, the professor taught one of the groups at the university where the daughter of one of the city's influential figures was studying. This girl was a chronic truant, seemingly unconcerned about her studies. Usually, she solved all her problems either with money or by mentioning her father's name, but the strict and honest Professor Fernandez refused to give her a passing grade on the exam when he saw her for the first time all semester. He honestly assessed her knowledge, which was insufficient for a high grade, and she didn't like it at all. Angered by the professor, the girl slandered him, painting him in an unfavorable light. She accused him of harassment, and because of her father's influential position, everyone believed her. The scandal was enormous, and the man was fired from the university. In an instant, his reputation became so terrible that he was not hired by any other university, journals and publishers refused to print his articles, and no private practice dared to employ him. He couldn't even work as a tutor. With his reputation, it was impossible. Everyone avoided him. His savings kept the teacher afloat for a while, but when they ran out, he desperately began looking for other work. But there too, he faced failure. A spinal injury he suffered in his youth prevented him from getting a job involving physical labor. And for employment elsewhere, he lacked either experience or the necessary skills. When the money ran out, and he could no longer pay the mortgage, the bank seized all the property the man had. And that's how Julio ended up on the streets. The story touched Dolores deeply, and it was incredibly difficult for her to see her beloved professor in such an incredibly tough situation. She couldn't imagine how much he had endured, being deprived of the support of everyone he had once known. Professor. Dolores took Julio's hand in hers and smiled at the man. Don't worry. I know what to do. Before Gabby and Anita could understand what had happened, Dolores and Julio left the cafe, leaving the 2 friends in absolute bewilderment. And if they had been silent throughout the conversation, after their friends left with the homeless professor, they were equally speechless for a long time. Julio walked, hardly believing what was happening, while his former student kept talking. Don't worry about anything. I'll handle everything the right way. Trust me. She didn't deceive him. Over the next few days, she took leave from work and rallied all the acquaintances she had from university. Most, upon hearing about the incredible difficulties faced by their former beloved professor, immediately offered to gather and discuss what could be done to rectify the situation. And although at first Dolores could only notify her own group, the news soon spread to other students who had loved Professor Fernandez's lectures and seminars. As it turned out, Many hadn't even realized what had happened to him. Soon, those older or younger than Dolores's group joined in, and eventually, it grew to incredible proportions. People wrote articles, posted on social media, and carefully prepared to defend the honor of their beloved professor, both publicly and in court. Julio Fernandez, suddenly among all the students he had once taught, couldn't believe his luck. They finally believed him. When it came to meeting with the girl who had slandered him, she panicked at the sight of so many people going against her. She immediately recanted her statements on her father's advice, who was furious at what his daughter's actions had led to. But she didn't get off easily. The court ordered her to pay a hefty fine for defamation. Due to the involvement of many of Professor Fernandez's former students, this case gained such extensive resonance in society that his name reigned in headlines and publications for a long time. Everyone who could wrote about him. And although the girl who slandered the professor disappeared from the radar, people talked for a long time about how unfairly she had treated him. With the restoration of Professor Fernandez's reputation, his life also improved. The university, offering public apologies, rehired him as a lecturer. Initially, they even allocated a room for him in the dormitory, but after his first paycheck, he was able to rent his own apartment and gradually began saving up to buy a house in the future. The former students, who had helped him so vigorously through the difficulties, were glad that their respected professor had returned to his beloved job and was ready to guide young minds again, teaching them not only psychology but also demonstrating by his own example that even in the most horrifying circumstances, it was worth remaining true to oneself. Although the situation was resolved in the best possible way, there were a couple of people who were outraged that it all happened the way it did. Gabby and Anita, who had been meeting together all this time while Dolores was fervently helping her mentor rebuild his life, often discussed how their plan had failed in the most unexpected way. "We wanted to set her on the path to true happiness," sighed Gabby once again. "Yeah, with her enthusiasm, she'll probably end up without a husband. And if she does find someone, she definitely won't be able to tell a good man from a scoundrel." Anita also didn't quite understand why their plan had turned out the way it did. And although on one hand they were able to accidentally bring together a former student and a teacher, even helping the man out of poverty in the process, there remained the fact that Dolores remained unmarried. On the other hand, Dolores was delighted that life had once again brought her together with someone she respected from university days. And after Professor Fernandez returned to his beloved work, she often found time to meet with him, gaining in him a loyal friend, excellent advisor, and wonderful conversationalist. Moreover, her life changed for the better in other ways too. All her classmates reconnected, regularly meeting up and discussing whatever they pleased, always remembering to invite the professor, who was more than happy to engage in hours-long discussions and debates on a multitude of topics. And although Dolores, as before, wasn't actively seeking a man, life took a turn such that one evening after a regular gathering, she unexpectedly received a call from one of her university acquaintances. The man, finding her no less charming and intelligent than before when they studied together, decided to take the first step and invite her on a date. Dolores agreed, and they met at the same cafe where Julio Fernandez's life had changed. But that's a whole different story. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and leaving a comment. Thank you very much.